Hello, I'm Scott Young. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of Community Health Endowment, which is one of Lincoln's great assets, one of Lincoln's many great assets that benefits the community in a wide variety of ways. We're going to find out today about what Community Health Endowment is, what its history is, perhaps what its future might look like, and we're going to do all that with Lori Seibel, who has been on the ground floor of Community Health Endowment since it began some 27 years ago. She was not only on the ground floor, she was in the basement for this thing when it was getting started up. So Lori, thanks for making time. I know you're busy right now.
It's a great time.
It is a great time. For people that don't know what Community Health Endowment is or its origins, would you give that history? And I must tell you, I was born at Lincoln General Hospital, so this is a big deal to me. This is personal for me.
A lot of people were born there and have a very strong emotional attachment, so I understand that. Well, it was back in the mid-1990s when the city leaders started thinking about selling Lincoln General Hospital. You know, healthcare was becoming incredibly complicated. Hospital care was becoming, the whole system was a complicated system. And so the city started thinking about what could happen if they started to sell the hospital. Now, I will tell you, once that became public, it was an incredibly difficult time. It was a tumultuous time. People had, like you, had strong attachments to the hospital. People had been born there, obviously, but also many people, the end of their lives were spent there, or there were generations of nurses that had been trained there. So there was a strong emotional attachment, as often is the case for a community hospital. So it was a hard time. People had a lot of opinions about what was going on at that time, and even today, Mike Johans, who was the mayor at the time in Lincoln, says it was one of the toughest issues that he faced in public life was thinking about selling the hospital.
I've heard him say that was the toughest decision. That was tumultuous is a good word for it. Lori, where were you when this conversation began about selling Lincoln General Hospital?
Well, I was the city's epidemiologist. I was over at the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department, and I had done a lot of community processes, worked on bringing people together around talking about issues, trying to solve problems. And so at that time, the mayor, at the very end of the process of selling, asked me to come over and talk about how to move this process forward. And so that's kind of how I entered into the picture.
Do you know who might have started that conversation? Was it Mayor Johans, or was it city council members, or how do you know how that conversation began?
The conversation about the sale?
Yes.
I don't really know that. I have to be honest with you. I just kind of came into the picture and watched a little bit from afar as they were going through the process of selling the hospital and as people were raising concerns about what that might look like. What I heard at that time, as a member of the community and as really kind of an avid observer of what was happening, was that people were saying, perhaps they understood about the complexity issue, but it was very important to them that the hospital maintain local ownership.
Yes.
And that wasn't the case across the country. Across the country, large chains were coming into communities and buying up hospitals. And there was a real concern about that.
In the late 90s, it was Bryan Memorial Hospital and Lincoln General Hospital and St. Elizabeth's out. It wasn't on 70th Street at the time, or maybe it was. Was it out there then? So the decision is made, let's at least explore selling the hospital. So what took place then? Well,
they finally reached an agreement that the hospital would be sold, and I think it was an incredibly important decision that the city council and the mayor made to sell it to Bryan Memorial Hospital because that local ownership was retained.
Yep.
Now, I will tell you that the hospital sold for $37.8 million. That was the sale price. Could the city have received more from a national chain? Yes. But the community really spoke up and said that local ownership was much more valuable to them. And I will also tell you that most of those national chains, if not all, are long gone and went through bankruptcy proceedings and all kinds of things that would have left Lincoln in a very difficult position. So that sale to Bryan, maintaining that local ownership, was really kind of one of the very first of many important steps in creating the endowment.
So the decision is made to sell the hospital, the price is agreed upon. What happened then?
Well, then that is about the time the mayor said to me, Mayor Johans said, we need somebody to take this to the next step. And this is probably that next step that was so important, that a mayor would say, help me and the city council decide, what do we do now with this $37.8 million? Again, across the country, when these sales were happening, nobody was asking the community what they wanted to do.
Yep.
And that was really, really important. So I was asked to come over because of my previous experience, come to the mayor's office and go through a process, really given free rein, if you will, to be able to say, go to the community, talk with them, hear what they have to say about this money that the city now has. And along with me, the mayor appointed a blue ribbon task force and nonpartisan people from everywhere in the political scope and across the community to say, Lori and this group will go out and listen hard to the community about what they want to do. And we did that for about 9 months.
And so you became a city employee at that?
I was employed by the mayor's office, yeah.
Okay. So you listened to the community and came up with a number of ideas about what should happen to that money, and I'm sure there were some strong opinions about that. How did we land on community health endowment?
Well, we did. We went out, we did phone lines, and we did listening sessions, and we did focus groups, and we did public hall meetings, and I have, and you've seen them back in the office, binders filled, big binders
Yes.
filled of what people told us. Everybody had an opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a time where I believe the most important thing we could do was listen. And we did. We listened to people who were scared about what was going to happen. We listened to people who were angry about what had happened. We listened to people who were excited and optimistic about what was happening. And at the end of the day, they asked for a couple of things in a final report, the community. It was clear they wanted the money put into an endowment.
Okay.
And specifically, their words, and I'll never forget them, was, we want this money worth to future generations what it's worth to us today. So that was the guiding principle from the very beginning. They also said that they wanted it to be used, because of the history of Lincoln General, they wanted the money to be used to make Lincoln a healthy city. That was where we kind of landed. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that 9-month process, it wasn't a healthier city, it was the healthiest city.
Yeah. Yeah.
And their words were, somebody's got to be the healthiest, so why not Lincoln? Right?
Why not? That's right.
And so, but then they went a little further than that. And they said, we would like this fund to be governed by a community board of trustees, of which you, of course, are one of them, Scott.
A member in good standing.
You are. And so imagine saying to the city, we want a community board to govern $37.8 million of assets. That's a pretty big ask, yes. Right?
Yeah.
Then they went a little further and they said, we would like that board to be able to hire their own staff. We would like them to be able to invest that money according to their own policies. And we would like them to be able to decide how the money is spent. They put it all on the table. Those were really strong words, and people were very strong-minded about that. So this is when the city council and the mayor come back in, and do they accept that recommendation or not? And in August of 1998,
okay.
They voted to accept those recommendations as they were written. Another big key point in the development of the endowment was a city council making an incredibly bold and visionary decision to allow this report to guide their way going forward. And so the Community Health Endowment was born.
Lori, was there much dissension about the ideas that were put forth by the Blue Ribbon panel?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure there were people who were wondering how this would all come together, but it was such a strong opinion from the community. And I felt like we gave everyone a chance to tell us what they were thinking. So at the end of the day, all of those things that I outlined were strongly community influenced. Yep. So what I like to say, and what is important to me, is that what started in kind of a place of community, discord and concern, about a year later became the community's endowment. It became a product of the community's voice. And I hope that we've continued to hold tight to that throughout our history.
Product of the community's voice is a great line.
Yeah.
And great framing. And so you're done now with your task, and then what happens?
Well, then they came and they said, we need staff.
Sure. Everything needs staff.
Everything needs, somebody needs to kind of continue to move this forward. And I'm going to be honest with you, Scott, that was like, I never run an endowment. I'd never done a lot of the things that had been asked of me, what would be asked of me. But I think that what they saw was a person who carried this community voice with them and who believed so strongly in making sure that what the community said would happen would happen. And that kind of reigned supreme over whatever my abilities may or may not have been. And so they asked me to become the first president of the endowment. And at that point, it was me and me alone in a cubicle, and trying to think about how this was all going to happen.
And Lori, that would have been a board decision. I mean, the board of directors, trustees would have been formed first.
Yes, yes.
And then it was the board of trustees that officially and technically made that offer to you to be the president and CEO.
And as you know, the mayor recommends and the city council appoints the trustees to the endowment. So it's not as if there's no connection. There's still a very strong partnership. The leadership is highly influenced by the mayor and the city council. So there is still those strong ties, and there's never a day that goes by we don't understand that this is the public's money, this is the community, these are public assets. And so that tie remains still very strong.
So you took the job. Where was the cubicle?
Our first cubicle was actually on the top floor of, I'm trying to remember, it was the telephone company at the time.
Oh, yeah.
We went through a series of them, Lincoln Telephone, Alliant, Alltel. I can't remember where we were in the picture, but the Woods Charitable Fund was located there as well due to the kind of just a contribution by the telephone company and Mike Tavlin, who was on the board at the time. And so we found ourselves up on the top floor of the telephone company building.
I used to deliver proposals, grant proposals at the telephone company building to you. So in 1998, it was $37.8 million, which the city held, those funds. And here at the end of 2024, what is that amount of dollars that is in the Community Health Endowment, give or take?
We have added to that $38.2 million. And so the fund today stands at right around $76 million, which is an inflation adjusted, of which I'm very proud of, that we've achieved that inflation adjusted. It's worth today to our community what it was worth back in 1998. And then we've returned almost $44 million back to the community in funding, grants, to achieve that vision we had of creating the healthiest community.
That has to be so satisfying to you and to the boards of trustees, past and present, to know that those 1998 voices are still heard in 2024.
It has been such a commitment of mine. It really has. And part of it was because I was there, and I sat and I listened to people talk about deeply what was important to them. And so when I started this job, along the way there has been, not many, but a few detractors, or there have been people who've wondered about that. But it's easy for me to just reflect on what the community said. And to be honest with you, I don't think the way the community feels today is any different. I don't think they would have made a different decision. The times are different. I mean, certainly the discourse is different, but I believe that it still is a strongly held community value that those funds be used to return opportunity, a chance to be a healthier community back to Lincoln.
Data has been a huge part of Community Health Endowment and its mission to make Lincoln the healthiest community in the nation. You were a data person coming in, and you've seen data's importance grow over the years. Talk a little bit about how data has shaped Community Health Endowment and shaped your views of things.
Well, a lot of times people say to me, what an easy job you have, You just sit around all day and hand out money, I mean, how hard can it be,
That's
right?
right.
And I've always said, you say, unfortunately, no more than you say yes. And trying to think about a way to make decisions effectively. Because even though we have this community holds this great asset, we don't have enough to solve every problem, right?
That's right.
And so you have to think about how can we invest deeply and effectively and in ways that we know will really change the trajectory of people. and their health. And so for me, as a former epidemiologist, I was not the classic research epidemiologist. I mean, I couldn't put together a research project to save my life, but I loved the ability of using data to tell stories and making it usable to people. And so when you would look at information and say, why does this population have a different outcome than this population? That was always intriguing to me. And so bringing that data or that storytelling mindset into this work was kind of just a natural
thing for you,
me.
yeah.
And so we began the process of thinking about how could we use data to help make really good decisions that we could then maybe help in making hard decisions, but also be able to say to the community, this is how we do it. This is the process that we use to make these decisions.
And the why.
The why.
Yeah.
So for a number of years, we kind of explored how to do that. We used data. And then I became kind of fascinated with the concept of using maps and mapping our community. The whole process of, does it matter where in your community you live? Does that matter to your health and what your potential outcomes are? So, we began this process about 10 years ago of mapping our community, really as an internal process of saying, how can we make decisions better? What we learned was that people love maps.
Yeah.
People love maps.
Yeah.
And they love how personal they are. They love being able to see themselves. You look at a chart or a graph, it's like, I don't know where I am in there,
Yep.
right? But if you look at a map, it's like, oh, I live there.
I can see my house from here. Yeah.
Right. And so maps are also help you learn about your place, but they also help you learn about places where you don't live.
Yeah.
And so people became very interested in this map work. And we worked really closely with the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department, who's been our incredible data partners in this. We worked with Lincoln Public Schools, with the Lancaster County Medical Society, Partnership for Healthy Lincoln, all these folks who were very data-driven as well and could bring us information. And we began publishing just a book of maps.
Yep.
And we called it Place Matters because that's what the maps told us, that place does matter. And then we've used that not only as a guide for our decision making, but it's being used across the county, the city, in the same way. And we're really excited about that.
Stop me if I'm wrong here, but the University of Nebraska got involved with this in gathering data, didn't they?
One area that they got involved is the Nebraska Extension. I
Yep.
should have mentioned them. Nebraska Extension helped us really look at healthy food access, something that you know a lot
Yep.
about, healthy food access, and which neighborhoods have access to healthy food in their neighborhoods. They sent students out to every store in Lincoln that sells food, whether it be grocery stores or convenience stores or gas stations or ethnic stores, and looked for healthy food. And they continue to do that. They've done that throughout our process, which has really been helpful to us.
When you started gathering all that information, were there surprises in that for you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, and that's why you gather it, right?
Yeah.
What kind of surprised you as you think back on that first Place Matters caper? What surprised you about that?
Every iteration, we do it every 2 years. We've done it every 2 years since 2015. With every one, there's just something where you say, I never would have known that. So when you look at things like poverty, for example, you and I or the community may say, I know where poverty is. But what we don't always know is how it's moving,
Yep.
How it's in some places hidden. And so that kind of work was really interesting to me because sometimes maps help you get ahead of the problem, or they help you frame how to approach a problem before it maybe even becomes evident on the surface of a community. So if you look at a map like that and you say, hey, we can now maybe plan our bus routes a little differently. Not us, but the city. I mean, they can use it in that way. Or perhaps we can do our food distribution sites a little bit differently because we're seeing things on maps. I'll look at a topic like prenatal care. And we can see specifically which census tracts, which neighborhoods in our community have the lowest rates of prenatal care, which every woman should have adequate prenatal care. I mean, that's just a no-brainer, right? And so, but we can look at specific neighborhoods. So think about how you can target funding to neighborhoods, to those institutions that are in those neighborhoods, those schools and neighborhood associations and churches and hair salons, you know, groups that are reaching women in those neighborhoods with this information instead of
guessing.
Yeah. We know.
Yeah.
And my line has always been, it's not like we don't know. We know. Mm-hmm. And now how do we target those areas really intentionally and really deeply? Sometimes you just have to go deeper, and these maps allow us to do that.
The thing that struck me about Place Matters, the first one I looked at, and I was working at the food bank, was life expectancy differences by zip code and by census tract. And I used to speak to groups about that, and they were shocked to hear the wide variety of disparity between zip codes and census tracts in terms of how long a person might live. And I still reflect on that and think about the equity, which has become a big topic, not only for community health endowment, but for nonprofits and foundations across the country. Talk a little bit about CHE's commitment to equity.
Well, when we talk about health equity specifically, there is no question, if you look at the data, that some populations, some groups have a more difficult time being healthy. And there's obvious reasons for that. I mean, perhaps a person does or doesn't have health care, or perhaps a person does or doesn't have access to healthy food. But for us, it is not a word that we use to encompass just a large concept. For us, health equity says we have the data. We know that there are inequities. And some of those are based on where your starting line might be. For example, generational poverty, getting out of that is a tough thing to do. And so everyone's starting line is a little bit different. Some of it may have to do with where you live in the community and what access you have to certain things. There's so many intersections across all of this, but our desire really is to assure that the conditions are ripe for everyone to have a chance to be healthy. And I can't imagine anyone in the community not thinking that that's a good idea.
But there's always push and pull on various subject matters. And you know, we talked recently about big grants and you know, earth-shaking grants that move needles, but we've also talked about smaller grants and smaller pots of money. Would you reflect a little bit, and you said saying no was one of the hardest parts of this job, and it is, because there are a lot of people at the table for a community health endowment. Talk about the importance of the small grants in addition to the needle-moving grants that you and I have talked about.
You know, you're kind of pushed and pulled between processes and what you really believe is the right thing. You know, and sometimes we get put in these boxes of these arbitrary processes in this work where it's like, well, we won't accept a grant or we won't give a grant that's any less than a certain amount or any more than a certain amount. Or we won't stay in a project longer than 1 year or whatever those parameters are. And so I hope that I have, over the course of time, been a student of understanding that sometimes, you know, that just doesn't work. You know, problems are complex, problems are big, problems come and go. And so setting these kind of arbitrary, you know, boundaries, thank you, is sometimes a hard thing for me to do. And so we've always said, you know, a project may be large and it needs to be large, but we also have to look at these small projects that maybe catapult an idea forward, that maybe test an idea, that maybe simply put a piece of equipment or remodel a room that allows more services to be given. I mean, small projects are really powerful as well. And I'll give you an example, if that's okay. I remember a few years ago, this was in our very first year of giving grants.
Okay.
And so it's
this was a few years
ago. A long
ago.
time ago. And the physicians in our community came to us and they said, we're having trouble really serving homeless individuals because of the transportation barrier. Folks just aren't getting to the appointments, and we don't know how to fix that.
Yep.
So we asked the community, we said, what do we do about that?
And you're concerned about the docs.
I am only concerned about the docs. I'm trying to make the doctors happy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so, again, this was my very first year in healthcare, doctors. I want to make sure everyone's, feeling good about this. And so we put that idea out to the community. We got one response, one idea. And that was to use individuals who were in recovery from mental illness or substance abuse and to hire them as van drivers to take homeless individuals to their doctor's appointments. Now you got to remember, this is 25 years ago.
Maybe didn't make sense on paper.
Stigma was much greater than it is today, including some of my own. And I was thinking, I'm not sure, how is this going to work? It seemed a little risky to me, and I'm frank about that. So we ended up funding that grant. It was a small grant, and we ended up funding it because I wanted to make sure that the medical community was happy. Good goal, no question.
Sure.
So if you move forward about 6 months, we went out and visited with the program. I got there a little early, walked into the room, and there was a woman, just I and another woman sitting in the room, and her name was Melissa. And so I introduced myself. She introduced herself as the van driver. She was the person who was providing the rides. And in that 15 minutes of just her and I sitting in that room, it's one of those moments you never forget, because she began talking about what this program meant to her. She said, yes, the physicians were happy. They thought it was great. They were getting a service that was truly needed. But then she talked about what it had meant to her as a person who was recovering from severe and persistent mental illness that she'd struggled with her whole life, but who was now using her period of recovery to give back to individuals who were perhaps in the similar situation, those folks who were on the bus or on the van that she was driving every day. She was assisting with her own recovery by having a great job, a job that meant something to her, not being able to rely on other forms of assistance. And for the first time, it struck me that sometimes the picture is bigger than what you understand. I was worried. I had a laser focus over here. I had not really thought about what this meant to an individual, to a person who, in many respects, the impact was much, much greater. So I always say, sometimes I've learned that impact is a two-way street, but you have to remember to look both ways. And that program, that moment in that office, so many years ago, 25 years ago, led us on a journey to fund people like Melissa throughout this community. Millions of dollars invested in folks like Melissa who are giving back. They're supporting their own recovery, but they're providing services to help the next person do that. And I've seen success story after success story after success story. So what starts as a very small, what seemingly seems like a small, and I have your laser focus in one way, turns out to be much, much bigger.
I love that story, and you, Melissa's still employed doing this work.
Doing the same work, helping the people all over this community, doing an incredibly valuable service.
And the docs that you were trying to please, they've probably come and gone, but
I
Melissa
is
still being impacted.
So I've learned in this job that you have to look for those moments, and you have to understand when you see something that is so compelling, you can't forget about it.
Lori, thanks for your 27 years plus, and we expect that you'll remain committed to the community and to Community Health Endowment.
Absolutely.
And the impact that you and your staff have had on this community is immense. It's nothing short of immense. And you have a lot of fingerprints on a lot of really worthwhile projects. And we didn't get to all of it today. Maybe that'll be part 2 for the Lori and Scott show.
Hey, I think we're onto something there. And Scott, thank you for your service. Your time at the food bank and all the things that you do across this community. One thing I know is that you've made it in life when you get a Scott Young handshake. So
you're easy. Thank you, Lori. If you'd like to find out more about Community Health Endowment, we invite you to take a look at the website, chelincoln.org. Thanks to Lori Seibel. Thanks to LNKTV. Have a great day, all.